This time, let your brother have a baby. You can have another one later. I told my parents I was pregnant. Then my mom said something shocking. Zach and his wife Rosie, who can't have kids, want us to give them our baby for adoption. My parents always favored Zach and ignored me. The happy future I imagined with my first baby turned into sadness. I'm Olivia. I've been married to Walt for 3 years. We're happy and thinking about having a baby soon. But I haven't been close to my family because of issues with my parents and brother Zach. In our family house, my parents, Zach, and his wife Rosie all live together. Zach has been praised since he was little, excelling in school and landing a job at a big company, which he'll probably take over from Dad. Our parents have always adored him. I, on the other hand, didn't stand out academically and wasn't as good-looking, so I never felt that close to our parents. I often felt left out and lonely because Zach got so much attention. Mom especially favored him, always by his side and hardly ever paying attention to me. When she did talk to me, it was usually criticism. Zach followed Mom's lead and didn't treat me well either, so we never really got along. I felt like I didn't belong at home and became more and more isolated. Because of that, right after finishing high school, I moved out. My parents didn't seem bothered when I told them I was leaving. If anything, they seemed happy about it. After leaving, I found a job, and 3 years later, I married Walt, who was in the same class as me. I wanted to start my own family and find peace away from my parents' influence. I only go back home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I don't really want to, but my parents insist. They care a lot about appearances, and it wouldn't look good if their daughter never visited. So I put up with it and visit twice a year. I reluctantly went back this Thanksgiving, but my mother was as distant as ever. "You and your husband are still not that impressive," she said, dampening the festive atmosphere. She started being sarcastic right away. She only called us back to say such things. If she's going to be like this, she shouldn't even bother calling, I thought, trying to ignore her sarcasm. But she kept going. "We're worried about you. You two live so modestly. We always think you'll come asking for money. My family is pretty wealthy, but since I left, I've never asked for financial help. Walt and I manage fine on our own earnings. We even send them proper birthday gifts." "We would never do that," I quickly replied to her unfounded accusation. Then she said, "But you two are still earning modestly, right?" and turned to look at Walt next to me. "Walt, you're still at that detective agency, right? How long do you plan to stick with that questionable job? Aren't you embarrassed?" Indeed, Walt works as a detective, something she always mocks. She sees detective work as sketchy and inferior to regular jobs. As Walt tried to explain his job to her, Zach jumped in. "Mom, there's no point in even listening to that. Detective work is shady, something nobody respectable does. It's a job for people beneath us. The pay must be peanuts compared to mine," showing off his superiority. Zach shared her disdain for detective work, a sentiment we've heard since we got married. Walt stayed quiet, but I felt upset that his job was being dismissed outright. Walt has always been my support, understanding what my family is like since our college days. That's why he always joins me when we visit my parents, not wanting to leave me alone. Even though he knows it won't be pleasant, I still feel guilty about it. Like many visits before, this one ended on a sour note. Around that time, we decided to live modestly together, unaffected by my family's opinions. Something amazing happened in our 3rd year of marriage. I found out I was pregnant. I was thrilled to be expecting our first child. Knowing how my parents always put me down, I felt like I had to share the news with them, so I went to our family home to tell them. It had been a while since I visited outside of Thanksgiving and Christmas, and my parents, Zach, and his wife Rosie were all there, but their reaction to my announcement caught me off guard. When my mother heard the news, she suddenly got loud. "How could you say that in front of Zach?" Her response was unexpected. I wasn't expecting congratulations, but this was different. I was confused by her mentioning Zach, and when I looked puzzled, she dropped a bombshell. "Zach and Rosie can't have kids. How could you be so insensitive?" I had no clue they were dealing with infertility. Shocked by her words, I glanced at them. Zach seemed uncomfortable, and Rosie looked down sadly. "You're having a baby before Zach. If it wasn't for Rosie, this wouldn't be happening." My mother sighed dramatically, looking between Rosie and me. Seeing this, Zach stepped in. "Rosie already feels bad enough. Don't be too hard on her, Mom." I was surprised to hear him defend Rosie. From what I knew from my visits, Zach wasn't usually that supportive of her. "You're really kind, Zach." Then Zach said something that made me pause. "Rosie, if it weren't for being married to Zach, you would have been divorced by now." My mother shot Rosie a glare. Maybe despite everything, Zach does care about his wife. As I watched Zach calm our mother down, I thought about what had just happened. Well, I shared my news, so I should head home, I said, feeling the tension rise because of my announcement. But then my mother said something unbelievable. "Give your baby to Zach." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Give my baby to Zach. Why should I? I can have another baby if I want to. Just because Rosie can't have children doesn't mean I should give mine away. That's unfair and ridiculous. When I refused, my mother argued, "This is our first grandchild. It should be raised by us. Zach will take over the company, so we should raise the baby." Her words made me furious. She was planning to take my unborn child just to ensure a successor for our father's company. She talked about adoption like she had it all planned out, but I was too angry to listen. I was already irritated, and then Zach said something shocking. "Well, since Rosie can't have kids, it's good for her that you got pregnant. You're finally doing something for the family." I couldn't believe it, but Zach seemed to agree with my mom. Even Dad, who usually stays quiet, nodded along. It felt like the whole family was claiming my baby as their own. I couldn't believe how casually Zach spoke to his own wife like that, acting like it was no big deal. I realized there was no point in arguing further, so I left right away. All they said was, "Give us an answer next time you come," and didn't even come to say goodbye. Rosie, who must have been hurt, silently watched me leave. Even after I got home, I couldn't shake off my anger. Instead of celebrating my pregnancy, they made this unreasonable demand. I felt gloomy thinking about the future. They'd probably keep pushing for adoption even after the baby was born. When I told Walt what happened after he got back from work, he was shocked too. Even he couldn't find the words to respond. He knows my family, but this was beyond belief. A few days later, we were surprised by an unexpected visitor at home. "What brings you here all of a sudden?" "It's rare to see you alone," I said to Rosie. She looked tired, with dull skin and messy hair. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at us. "Olivia, I'm really sorry about what happened the other day," she said, referring to when I announced my pregnancy. It wasn't her fault, but she seemed burdened by the unreasonable demands my family had made. Then she said she had something important to discuss. "What is it?" I asked, inviting her in to talk. What she told me was shocking, and my anger flared up again. Trying to stay calm, she shared a significant truth with me. Walt had been quietly listening to our conversation and then chimed in with something equally astonishing and infuriating. Rosie's tears started again as she listened to Walt. With this new information from both of them, I made a decision. I vowed to myself to hold my parents and Zach accountable, to settle past grievances and seek justice. 3 months later, with my belly starting to show, Walt and I visited my family home. My parents, Zach and Rosie, were there. Without even a greeting, my mother asked, "You've decided to give the baby to Zach, right?" It seemed like she couldn't think of anything else. As I said before, that's not happening. I replied, but my parents glared at me as if they couldn't accept it. "No matter what you say, we're taking that baby. Stop being stubborn," my mother said, clearly angered by my refusal. Zach and my father just watched, not intervening. "No matter how much you insist, I'll never give the baby away. But I came here today to show you something." "Is that okay, Rosie?" I asked, looking at Rosie, who nodded silently. "Rosie intends to divorce Zach, and this is why." I pulled out some photos from an envelope I had brought. That was the reason for my visit today. Zach was speechless as he looked at the photos. They clearly showed him kissing another woman and entering a hotel. Undeniable proof of his infidelity. "Shocked to have been caught," he muttered. "Who took these photos?" Our parents, standing next to Zach, looked bewildered, their gaze shifting between him and me. They probably had no idea about his affair. "It was Walt who took these," I said. Walt, who had been silently observing, explained how he had come across the photos. As a detective, he had seen Zach with another woman while working on a case. Out of curiosity, he investigated further and found out about Zach's affair. The decisive moment was captured in those photos, as Zach thought he had cleverly hidden his affair. He was stunned and speechless. "Adultery is grounds for divorce. You need to compensate Rosie properly," I said, breaking the tense silence. But Zach, instead of apologizing, blamed Rosie for his actions. "Yeah, it's your fault, Rosie. You're so incompetent. I'm just having a little fun outside," he said, with our mother backing him up, trying to shift the blame away from Zach. Seeing Rosie treated like I once was made me feel terribly sorry for her. So I decided to confront my family to save both of us. I pushed them further by pointing out Zach's faults. "Zach, you mocked Walt, but a professional detective's skills are extraordinary." Evidence kept piling up as soon as he started investigating. "And we found out something shocking about your mistress," I said, watching my parents tense up, wondering what would come next. "The woman you're seeing seems to be the daughter of a mafia boss," I revealed, watching Zach freeze in shock. He must not have known that. My mother screamed, "What? Is that true?" Upon hearing the revelation, she collapsed to the ground, covering her face, while my father looked terrified. "Zach, you were pretending to be single, right?" I asked, and Zach started to panic. "No, I didn't know either." Our parents, who had been so authoritative just moments ago, were now completely bewildered by this unexpected revelation. Then Rosie spoke up amidst the confusion. "You didn't just deceive your mistress, did you?" Her words brought tension back into the room. She repeated what she had told me during her visit. "You're infertile, aren't you?" Zach's face betrayed a look of realization. Our parents stared at him in shock. They had blamed Rosie for their infertility issues, but the truth was it was Zach himself. "Did you know, Rosie?" That was all he could manage to say. Our stunned parents struggled to find their next words, visibly shaken by the revelation. Rosie delivered the final blow. I found out accidentally while cleaning the room. She had stumbled upon his infertility diagnosis hidden in his desk drawer. Unable to admit it to his loving parents, Zach had kept this fact a secret and blamed Rosie for their infertility. Believing his words, our parents had unfairly blamed Rosie. His protective comments about Rosie when I announced my pregnancy were probably driven by his guilt over the issue. Blamed for something she had no control over, Rosie suffered every day. As the conversation turned to the topic of taking my child, Rosie spoke with a calm, unchanged expression. Meanwhile, my parents, just learning the shocking truth, were in a panic. "To think Zach will never have a child, that's just," my mother began, despairing at the thought of not having a grandchild. But then she turned her hysterical anger towards him. "You knew it was your fault, yet you blamed your wife. Did you cheat because you knew you were infertile? How could my son stoop so low? Oh dear, why did this happen?" She vented her frustration at him. Finally, Zach spoke, offering a pitiful explanation. "I was shocked to find out I was infertile. I felt guilty for not giving you a grandchild. When I found out Olivia was pregnant with a boy, it just seemed convenient." His words filled me with contempt. Pushing aside my anger, I delivered the final blow to the three of them. "Your selfish actions hurt Rosie and me. And Zach, you had an affair with such a dangerous person. Mom and Dad, you'll have to face the consequences of your actions. You've hurt so many people, now it's time to face the music." My words prompted them to apologize, their earlier bravado gone. Where did that confidence go when you asked me to give up my son? I looked at them with disdain, feeling as though I was looking at garbage. Beside me, Rosie remained silent, her gaze fixed ahead, silently conveying the depth of her sorrow. Tough times lay ahead for Zach and my parents. When the father of Zach's mistress discovered the affair, they were summoned and forced to apologize repeatedly. Despite ending the affair, Zach had to pay a hefty compensation for deceiving the woman. The amount was staggering, teaching them the harsh consequences of getting involved with such people. As a result, our family home descended into chaos. My father had to step down as company president due to the public scandal, and my mother became isolated, shunned by the neighbors, and withdrawing into herself. Their relationship became hostile, constantly arguing over Zach's actions. Zach lost his job after the scandal reached his company, and to add to his troubles, his divorce with Rosie was finalized. Struggling with unemployment and financial burdens, Zach found himself trapped in a cycle of relentless work. Around the time Rosie successfully left the family home, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Both the baby and I were in good health, and I reveled in the joy of welcoming new life. Our family of three embarked on happy days together. Eventually, Walt and I made the decision to sever all ties with my family. Although I have been torn about cutting off contact with my parents and brother, that incident made me realize it was the best decision for my son's well-being. Despite their absence, I have found solace and love in my irreplaceable family. From now on, I choose to cherish